Thanks so much for sticking with us through a couple of small technical difficulties. It's not a virtual conference without them, but we are delighted to get started here now. And we're going to be welcoming our first speaker to the stage now. I'd like to introduce Dr. Michaelyn Thomas, an executive leader in the aerospace industry. Michael, please turn on your camera and microphone, and we'd love to hear what you have to say to kick off the people track.
Hi, good morning. Okay, so let's see. Can I go ahead and share my screen?
Please do. I'll take myself off stage and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see here. Okay. So let's see. Okay, I just want to make sure. Oh, good. Okay, you can see all of my fun stuff here. Okay. And it's in presentation mode, correct? Okay, I can't see anybody, but maybe Sarah, you can give me a verbal that you can see my slides in presentation mode.
You're perfect, Michaelyn. Let's roll.
All right, wonderful. Alrighty, so good morning, everyone, and I am so delighted to be here, and I really appreciate the wonderful introduction, by Sarah, and it's really and truly an honor. Invited to speak with you this morning on the people and culture track. And so as you can see, my title is Think Big and Dream Bigger. Now, that sounds cliche, right? But really, this presentation is aimed to get you thinking about what you can do right now, today, to really set yourself up for success in the near-term future as well as beyond. So what you're going to hear about today is I'm going to explore with you my top 5 strategies on what has worked for me personally based on my experience. And at the end, I'll leave enough time for questions and observations and comments. But really, my goal is to really engage with the audience here, and because that's how we all learn. And so before diving into the content, I'd like to highlight some amazing women. So I work within the space industry, and whenever I get the opportunity, I love paying homage to the women who have modeled the way and who have really trailblazed and served as pillars in my community. And so depicted here are Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan, and they were each featured in the 2016 blockbuster hit Hidden Figures. If you have not seen that movie, I really encourage you to do so. And so these 3 women of color were brilliant mathematicians and engineers working in an unwelcoming and discriminatory environment, and yet they persisted and served as a vital role in NASA's space program in the early years. And put simply, these 3 women were incredible and technically gifted and allowed their passion to guide them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about passion here in a minute. And they did not think or dream small, but yet they dreamt big and wildly, and their legacies will always be remembered for their excellence. I don't know about you all, but I really want to leave a legacy that has a large impact, just like these women. So diving into who I am. So I have a very unique journey that has not been traveled by most. However, ever since I was a little girl, I knew that I wanted to be in space, but I was told all the reasons why I would not succeed or be successful in that sector. And I refused to accept that. I always liked math and science, but I struggled with math, but I aced all of my science labs. So it wasn't until much later that I realized that I was really good at applied mathematics. But before I got to that point of that realization, I switched majors as an undergraduate to pursue a bachelor's in political science, public law. Most would have thought, how will you get into space with that? And I'd be lying if I didn't think the same thing. But through the help of an aerospace executive at the Boeing company, actually, he worked out at the gym where I worked. I had an opportunity to pick his brain and ask him a ton of questions. And he was so eager to help me and to answer my questions because he saw that I had a genuine interest. And luckily, in just a short couple of months, a contracts administration requisition became available at Boeing, specifically in their space division, and he encouraged me to apply. The rest is history. And one of my first contracts at the young age of 22 was a NASA contract. And I was actually responsible for the contractual administration duties of a space program. I couldn't believe it. I was ecstatic. And I knew that this was going to set the foundation of a very successful career for me. I went on to work many other roles at Boeing's Spaces division, and including becoming a material cost manager, a cost volume leader. And one day I worked up enough courage to apply to become the chief of staff to the vice president of government space. I wanted to break more into program management because I'd done a lot of financial jobs. And I knew that it was time, but I was so scared because I wasn't sure if I was ready. So I forced up enough courage, I applied, and I got it. I could not believe it, which I should have believed that. But I did get it. And so after spending a wonderful decade at Boeing, I was offered a huge position to serve as the head of affordability and the executive project manager for spaceport development around the globe at Virgin Orbit. And that's where I currently work professionally. I am a direct report into the CEO, and I'm also the executive sponsor for our women's empowerment business resource group. So it's a really, really exciting role. And, looking back briefly at my academia here, I mentioned that I have my poli-sci degree at the undergraduate level, but I also have my MBA and my doctorate in organizational leadership, and I'm just about to finish my Master of Science degree in Space Systems Engineering. I actually decided to go back to get my engineering degree because I've led so many engineers and I do a ton of community outreach, encouraging girls and women to pursue STEM education and careers. So it just made sense for me. Now, this sounds like a ton of school, but I love school. And that's what keeps me going. And again, my passion led me to travel this path. And it's so important to bring your best self to work. And I wanted both the academia and the industry because I knew that that clicked for me personally. And with that, I was able to create an online community entitled Spaced Out Doc. It embodies thoughts, experiences, and research through storytelling and efforts to build a strong community with a shared vision of women empowerment in the aerospace community. When I do the math, I went from an entry-level employee at an aerospace firm to reporting to a CEO at an aerospace firm in just a short 10 years. People always ask me, what's your secret? What did you do? But really, in a nutshell, my secret is that I do what I love and I love what I do. And that's what really, really joined me to really be compelled to pursue this path. And so my organizational leadership experiences and journey inspired me to reshape the aerospace experience by inspiring others to bring their best selves and advance their careers while they're at it. So now I want to share with you my top 5 strategies that focus on securing acceptance, advancement, and career success. Number 1, support and celebrate your peers. My number 1 rule is to never compare myself to others. It's tempting, but it's so unnecessary, and it's a distraction that you do not need. I'm also my own biggest competitor, and I refuse to compete with others or my peers. As long as your leader is happy with your performance, is impressed with your work, that's what matters. And it's equally important to celebrate your peers' successes because you never know who you may be working for or with in the future. And relationship building is so incredibly important to advancement. So again, support each other, support your peers, embrace, your technical competitors, because you're all aligned to the same goal. Next, diversity, inclusion matters. Create a positive sphere of influence. I cannot stress this enough. Diversity and inclusion is for everyone, not for one or a few demographics. And when people know that you are an inclusive leader or an inclusive employee, they want to work with you and they want to work for you. I have been very fortunate to have worked for leaders who really openly and expressively embrace inclusivity in the workplace, and it's created this wonderful environment to thrive in. Diversity is also important as well, because it's just not our physical differences, it's also the respect for diversity of thought and diversity to approach it, of really complex problems. That's how you really start to build that positive sphere of influence, when you welcome ideas and people. And diversity is the cornerstone of innovation, and it truly takes diverse minds and demographics to achieve greatness. Also, research shows that when employees feel included, they bring their best selves to work and productivity skyrockets. Diversity and inclusion is good business, and if you are recognized as someone who advocates for this, you will see your sphere of influence grow wildly. Next up is, instead of seeing problems, see opportunities. Embrace detours. Don't just stop at roadblocks. For every problem, try to find opportunities. This level of positivity is especially needed when the stakes are high. Going back to my career and academic roadmap, many of my successes were results of detours that I almost rejected. So be open-minded to that and fully embrace that. And also have your end goal in mind. A particular detour may actually help you achieve your end goal quicker than your original path. Number 4, work hard and speak up. Working hard goes without saying, because you must build your credibility by showing that you can do the job, that you are technically sound, that you know your stuff. And be nice to people while you're doing it. There's nothing worse than someone who is technically brilliant, but a jerk to work with. No one will advocate for you, and your sphere of influence will dwindle immensely. Speaking up is also so important, because your managers and leaders are not mind readers. I learned a very valuable lesson when I was working so hard. I was exceeding all of my manager's expectations. And when I went to talk to him, I'm like, well, I was really actually looking forward to this position. He's like, you didn't tell me. How was I supposed to know? You seem so happy doing with what you were doing. And I'm like, well, I am happy, but I thought you would have noticed that. And, I learned a very valuable lesson, to where he encouraged me from that point forward to speak up about my intentions, to have those career discussions with your leaders. Unfortunately, not all leaders will be in tune to that. And it's definitely a two-way street. So work hard and speak up and be nice to folks as you're doing that. And last but not least, knock down barriers by filling gaps. So I had a mentor once tell me that, Michaelyn, be a gap filler, identify issues, bring solutions to the table, tell organizations how you're going to help push their organization forward, how you're bringing value to the organization. And that really stuck with me. And that's actually a really good tip if you're on an interview. Don't just regurgitate your resume. It's really important to show your future focus and how you're going to push that organization forward based on your experience. And by doing that, you're actually knocking down barriers, because sometimes we can't see beyond what's immediately in front of us. And as you go beyond and really infuse that critical thought, that's when you start to knock down those barriers. And that's when you become recognized as a valuable person to the organization. So with that, dream big and let your passion guide you. Sometimes that guidance is embracing the detours and not going and actually going beyond your comfort zone. Now, I do want to mention this. While I did not inherently mention seeking out mentorship or sponsors, that is vitally important, and I cannot stress that enough. I do believe, though, that this is something that should be woven into the framework of anything. So it goes beyond just a strategy to advancement. It just needs to be to the core of who you are. And I know that sometimes folks do struggle with trying to find mentors or sponsors. So I do have some resources that I can point you to. But essentially, that is so important. So don't forget about that. And I want to end with highlighting these three women again. So with Katherine Johnson, her calculations of orbital mechanics were critical to the success of the first United States human spaceflight mission. She was also one of the first Black women to work at NASA as a scientist. And in 2015, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Mary Jackson, she became the first Black woman engineer at NASA. In 2020, the Washington, D.C. headquarters renamed itself to the Mary Jackson NASA headquarters. And Dorothy Vaughan, she became the first Black woman acting supervisor at NASA. She taught herself and others how to code to protect jobs, furthered NASA's efforts. While these women represent a lot of firsts, their efforts did not stop there because they worked tirelessly, can't talk, to recruit and retain underrepresented groups in the aerospace sector. And that's how you build a legacy, by dreaming wildly and by making that difference. And while they really experienced many firsts, they really, really represent not being the last. And that's what's so important. And that's what really summarizes how to really push yourself to think big, dream wildly, and to push yourself to that next level. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michaelyn. There's so much great information in there. It looks like we do have some questions coming in for you. And as a reminder for everyone joining us live, you can upvote the questions you most want the answers to, and there's still time to ask some more things that you'd like to know from Michaelyn's presentation. We've got a great question from Yara, who wants to know any suggestions for bringing these tips to a team to improve on team growth.
Oh, yes. So fundamentally, it starts with communication. It really does. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the executive sponsor for our Women Empowerment Group at my current organization. And it started with a conversation with other peers, leaders, and even our CEO. And so sometimes you have to have that candor, and you have to identify what's real and not sugarcoat certain issues. And through transparent communication, you'd be surprised how far you can take an initiative.
Fantastic. We've got another question that has a few upvotes. How can someone get started putting themselves out there when they don't feel qualified for a position?
Oh, man, yes, I definitely experienced this. It sounds like you're touching on imposter syndrome just a bit. And so that's where you feel that you don't belong, you don't have the street cred to do a great job. And, you know, sometimes that's driven by others' negativity, and use that as fuel. You know, you belong, you've earned your seat, know that, be confident in that. It doesn't matter what other people say, because at the end of the day, it matters what you bring to the organization, to your team, and how you conduct yourself. And again, it does start with that communication. You know, I certainly don't have all of the answers. I don't know everything, and I really do rely on my team to help. But you know what? I do also know that I was hired for a reason to do a job. And so therefore I belong, and you have to rest in that.
Fantastic. Thank you. We have another question coming in from Laura. She wants to know, is there a specific lesson learned? Anything you would change immediately if you could go back in time?
Oh, yes. So I would probably change how to speak up for myself. Very early on in my career, I did struggle with trying to identify microaggressions that I experienced. And so now that I've, lived a day in the life, I've really advanced my career, I can identify and recognize some of those things a little bit easier. And, I think before I probably just bottled most of that, which is not healthy. It's always good to have a peers, like a network of peers to chat with, or to feel empowered to talk to your HR representative if you feel that something has gone beyond what it should have. So really just standing up for myself, I would have changed that if I could go back in time.
That's really great advice, I think, for, past you and future everyone else. We do have another question in from Nadia, who wants to know, how did you manage your time to study a doctorate, extra degree in engineering, and even a master's?
Yeah, great question. I do get this question a lot. So again, all I can really say is I attribute it to my passion. So I worked a full-time job. I don't remember a time where I actually worked a 40-hour work week, but I just basically carved out protected time to study and to research. And when you're really passionate about something and you really love something, you'd be surprised as to how time just appears. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I did have to sacrifice certain, family gatherings and things like that, but it's temporary. It's just a season. And if you're really passionate about something, then it's really eye-opening because you have your eye on the prize. And I've learned very quickly, when I'm not passionate about something, I don't make time for it. So it really goes back to letting your passion guide you.
That's great. Another anonymous question in, what are some pitfalls or failures you've experienced in building this initiative? And I'd add, how have you learned from them?
Yeah, so I have failed a lot. And because I failed a lot, I have learned a lot. It's really hard to learn if you don't make mistakes. One of my, I don't want to say favorite mistakes, but I made a very expensive mistake once on a proposal. And I identified it and I spoke up about it in front of our president, our vice president, and the program manager. And I think they might have been a little taken back because, I could have easily swept it under the rug. I mean, a lot of people, unfortunately, may do that. And not only did I identify it, I worked with my team to build a solution. And that next day, I presented the solution. Now, we worked all night, and I was able to give credit to my team because I could not have done it without them. And our program manager actually pulled me aside and he said, Michaelyn, your candor and your honesty, I want you on all of my teams, because that was probably hard for you to do. And I'm like, well, it was the right thing to do to position the company appropriately. So that's one where, that is one instance to where admitting failure and embracing it could actually really advance you. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Own your mistakes. But it's also vitally important that your leaders are there for you and they don't leave you high and dry. So it's important to keep your leaders accountable as well. So I'll just leave it there. But yes, I've failed quite a bit.
Well, that's how you grow. We do have time for one last question, and we have two in from Svenja that are really great points, so I'm going to tie them in. She says, I also work in the space industry and struggle with the lack of diversity and inclusion in the field, especially in Europe. Any tips on how to foster diversity and inclusion? And then adds, you mentioned some tips you have for seeking mentorship. Could you recommend a few?
Yes, absolutely. So by you just existing in space, you're already more than 50% there. Now you just have to keep your door open. So in order to foster that, you have to be willing to share guidance, mentorship, and sponsorship with other folks as well. So what you see here is I have some of my contact information. So my website, spaceoutdoc.com, I have a blog that I run there. And so I do have helpful tips and tricks, as well as resources on how to continue that conversation. And actually, people reach out to me all the time and ask for questions because they're struggling. And so I point them to resources. And it's really important, again, it starts with that communication. You really need to identify the elephants in the room, have that candor, and really push to drive positive change. And now that I'm at a position to where I am, it would be irresponsible for me to shut the door and not provide guidance or mentorship. So by anyone existing, and you can lead from any chair. It doesn't matter if you are the CEO or a level 1 individual contributor. You are there and you are representing that diversity. Keep your door open. Always be willing to have those open and honest conversations. And if you have any further questions, my contact information is here. I will certainly get back to you and point you in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Michaelyn. It's been a real pleasure having you with us today. Everyone, you can see her contact information. SpacedOutDoc.com is a wonderful website that I've spent a little bit of time at recently to learn more about her. So thank you so much for your time. And everyone will be back in just a few minutes with our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.